a lesser known koan. Once a student travelled to see a teacher. He arrived and said, "Teacher, I have travelled 1,000 leagues to hear this Dharma." The teacher replied, "This Dharma reaches around the whole world." The student replied, "The sun never sets." At that, the teacher experienced a great realization. How should we understand this? Well, people often ask me where talks come from. Quite often in the context of it's something to do with something they were thinking about or something they mentioned when we were talking. I said, "Oh, is there any connection between, what we were saying in the talk?" And the answer is pretty much always yes, of course it was. There's a lot of Zen stuff and other stuff rattles around through me the whole time, and where that rhymes with what I've been talking about with somebody else, then that's clearly a sign that's interesting. That's worth pursuing now. Let's have a think about that. So, this koan, we could start looking at it in terms of maybe Taoism or ancient Chinese characters or something like that. Or we could say that before we started last week chatting, I was taking a little pride, frankly, in the fact that we had somebody in Minnesota, somebody in California, somebody in Spain, somebody in Scotland, a lot of people in Wales, a lot of people in England, obviously. Said, yeah, it's great, this Dharma, getting everywhere. And somebody replied, "The sun never sets," which was a lovely capping phrase and quite a good joke. And it made me feel complicated, made me just a little bit discomforted for a minute there. This was sharing, this was great, this was a joke, but equally, discomfort. And the thought arose in my head, well, I don't know, maybe you have to be of a certain nationality and a certain age, but what does the phrase "the sun never sets" mean to me? Well, the sun never sets on the British Empire, obviously. So the phrase that arose in my mind in response to that was, "Not my empire." Not my empire. Not me. Over there, please. I'm not part of that. Of course, this is just shame. This is guilt. This is, in psychological terms, as we've been beginning to explore, dissociation. Not me. I'll put it over there. Which made me reflect. What's our practice whenever I feel resistance? Whenever I feel that need to push away? Get curious. Start investigating. Just open. What came to mind was something I have talked about before, but it very definitely did come to mind. When I think about the British Empire, I think about being a boy, maybe 4, 5, 6. I think about being shown the map. Of course, we used the cartographic projection, which has Britain large, right in the middle of the map, and all the countries of the rest of the world fan out around Great Britain. It was red, and there's still quite a lot of red in those days. Not that I'm that old, but as the British Empire morphed into the British Commonwealth without ever actually officially ending, I was astonished actually. I just looked it up to see, and there's still dozens of little rocks and islands and bits of other places which are still actually part of the British Empire. I thought it had vanished years ago, but that's, kind of sideways issue. A substantial chunk of the whole map of the entire globe was coloured red for being British. How wonderful! We have so much of the world. What a shame we don't have the rest as well. Tragic, really. I mean, why? What was the reason for that? There's an image, and this is really the image I was talking about, what brings to mind. And this is in the cupboard in the kitchen, high up. It's actually not very accessible to a 4-year-old, 5-year-old, kind of way up there. Amongst the strange things that lurked there, and it wasn't the most wildly organised of kitchens, and it had various things that had been there since, I dread to think actually, time immemorial, was usually, possibly always, possibly not, but usually a bottle. Interesting, tall, square, thin bottle of thick brown liquid. And this was the bottle of camp coffee. Was, as the name suggests, originally designed as a way of making coffee when camping. You didn't need grounds. This was way before the invention of instant coffee. It's a coffee, chicory and sugar in water as a liquid form. You dilute it. Makes a perfectly palatable coffee drink. By the time that I was around, it's actually used much more as a flavouring in cookery. You could use it to make coffee cake or whatever. But what was significant about this was the label. Because on the label there was a tent, hence the camping reference, and the most wondrous, self-confident Highland soldier, British Highland officer, sat on his stool in his full glory of uniform, and behind him stood an Indian Sikh, we assume his Batman, holding a tray on which obviously was the bottle of camp coffee and a glass, cup, whatever for him. And this image seemed to me seemed then, unconsciously so, in retrospect, it seems the perfect image of empire that I was being sold as a child. Sold, emotive term. That I was being informed, educated about what empire was. The person at the front was white and British and male, and part of a military that prided itself in strength, in command, in dominance, and obviously, when necessary, a willingness to use force, violence, to enforce this white male rule over other countries. But that was, well, latent and softened and quite sweet, because after all, the guy holding the tray is an Indian, a Sikh. He's obviously only too happy to be part of this. His role, by nature, is secondary. He stands back in deference. He is there to serve. Brown serves white. There are various other images I just looked up to the other bits of advertising. They're all roughly along the same theme. Sometimes there's more combat. Sometimes we lack the Indian subtext. So it's very definitely a kind of white, male, cis, straight world. And this was just the way it was. Natural, no problem. Of course, it even, with its camping and its outdoors, it even has this kind of sense of command over nature as well. This is what we do. We go into wild places, uncivilized places. We tame them. We show them the error of their ways and the benefit of ours. It's just the way the world is, like the world being coloured red. It's just perfectly normal. Of course, or is it? The picture gets more interesting. It's conventionally assumed to be that of a real soldier. There's no real evidence that it is, but the story goes that it's Sir Hector MacDonald fighting Mac, hero of the Battle of Omdurman, which is the battle in the Sudan, where it was proved that machine guns and modern rifles can defeat a much larger army than you have. MacDonald ended up posted as Commander General of all the forces in what was then Ceylon, now present-day Sri Lanka. He was appointed shortly after the end of the Boer War, held that post for about a year and then committed suicide because of allegations about homosexual acts with Sri Lankan boys. So, that which is not in this vision of the world natural reappears, reasserts. Reality is always so much more complex. Started talking in terms of the psychological idea of self-states, these kind of almost complete ways of inhabiting the world. So not what we think, not simply our ideas, but the way that we actually inhabit the world, and these can be so subtly different and engaged with each other in different ways. We obviously start with things like, oh, well, I'm not quite the same person I am at home as at work. I'm not quite the same person I am with my children as I am with my parents. And we can go on through this. One of the interesting sources of problem, tension within this way of thinking about selves that I actually feel, I actually hold myself, I actually respond differently in different self states, is the idea that we try and maintain, or at least a part of us, some of our self states try and maintain, life living as the people we were told we were as children, from young children. And when I say told, I don't necessarily mean in words, I mean shown, as in the Camp Coffee label, as in the map coloured red. And that we try and maintain this view of ourselves, I'm using the wrong words again, aren't I? View, this mode of being in the world, of being the person I was meant to be. But of course, I'm so much more than that. I'm so different from that. I mean, what you see here is very obviously an old, white, male, cis, probably straight Zen teacher. How did I get that way? Do I really fit neatly into all of those boxes? Is that our preconceptions, our ideas about what I might be? You know, I talk quite white, I look quite white. It's complicated. And of course, this idea of living as who we're told we are, one of the major ways we're told who we are is through this series of oppositions. Yes, no, you're that, you're not that, you know. You're a man, you're not a woman. You're white, you're not black. You're straight, you're not gay or queer or whatever. And obviously the reality of our lived experience partly fits this and partly doesn't. Largely because none of these oppositions are in any way natural. They're cultural. They're the way in which we collectively understand the world. So being told I'm male has very little really to do with my DNA or anything like that, and everything to do with the way that I'm expected to talk and think and respond and feel. And we've talked about that, and we'll probably talk about that quite a lot again over time. But the direction that I'm going here is back towards the natural seemingness of the Camp Coffee picture. Because we quite often talk about the walls to our minds. You know, what keeps us blinkered, what keeps us thinking, looking only in one direction, not looking in another. And I suppose it's easy, and I suppose I normally imagine those walls as tall, high, stony, iron, defended, very visible. But actually, let's go back. Let's try thinking in another way. English gardens were remarkable in the 18th century for their natural approach to gardening, rather than squared off hedges, geometrical plantings. The aim was to create as convincing, as natural looking a landscape as possible. There's gardeners like Capability Brown. Of course, in reality, you'd have moved the trees, got the right trees in the right place, maybe imported them from hundreds of miles away. You might even have moved the village that was in the wrong place for the view, and everybody had to move and live wherever. But the point was, it seemed natural. Well, one of the key devices of this was the ha-ha. At the end of your very English, very flat lawn. Oh, beyond that, you can see there are cattle grazing, or maybe deer. Oh, why don't they come up to the house? Well, there's this blimming great ditch in the way. Too wide, too deep for them to cross. We're separating, we're keeping out. But the whole point is it's invisible. You can't see it from the house. You can only see it from up close. Well, what I want to suggest as an image is that the walls to our minds are often much more like ha-has than they are like castle walls. Of course, it is the world's silliest name, allegedly because you didn't see it and then you were out walking out, ha-ha, I see. Stupid name. But anyway, this is the point. It's invisible. You don't see it. You don't see the boundary. It elides. It smooths over. It's not a castle wall. It's just an absence, but it's still a line. You can't cross. And it allows you, as the landowner, in command of all that you survey, to create an image of nature that is seamless and continuous. And also, in that sense, a complete lie, because there's separation there. You've created the wall, the barrier, but we don't see it. And this is how self-states, ways of being in the world, actually operate. We don't see the edges. We don't see the walls. It's just, well, obvious that the world is that way, that I see the complete world as it is in this self. Obviously, I won't be different because I can't see the walls if I'm over there outside. The problem is in the tensions between these different self states, these different, I think you can talk about sets of self states. And so, whose empire? Not my empire. Yeah, well, I wouldn't have said that when I was 5. And it's a long way from there till now. But there's still, a part of me back there. And there's absolutely no denying that the world that I am now part of is absolutely framed by the real state of affairs, of which that image was such a significant part of my childhood. And in its own tiny way, along with a million other images, a significant part of making natural seeming, making unproblematic, unthreatening, uncontentious and entirely natural this state of affairs. It was obviously natural that white male Britons went abroad and conquered the world. None of us, I think that's fairly uncontentious actually, would be living the lives we lead in the way that we lead them were it not for the British Empire. It's complicated. All of us, we use that word, enjoy the benefits, but obviously hugely differentially. The British Empire is not the same if you're African American or European or Indian or white British or, well, any of the other differences that we can make. It's clearly not quite the same if you happen to be a woman, or gay, or trans, or pretty much anything. Are we honest enough to look? Are we honest enough to look hard? Because, as I say, it's resistance. In me, being whitish, male-ish, Britishish, shame, guilt, a bit, anger, outrage, a bit, complex emotions, acknowledging, enough. One of the main lessons of the precepts, and it's a massively important lesson of the precepts, is that we are all involved, we're all complicit in this. We all enjoy the benefits of a modern, technocratic, capitalist society. As I say, differentially though. For some of it's a paradise. For so many, it's a nightmare. Can we look within ourselves? Can we listen, really listen, to the cries of the world? We have the Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara, who hears the cries of the world. Are we prepared to hear the cries of the world? Because, well, it's going to bring us up pretty sharp in front of a lot of these ditches, these ha-has, these walls that we simply didn't know were there. What? That's the state of the world? That's how it really is? Can I, as myself, address the walls within myself, the different multiple self-states that I am? As a man, am I okay with my femininity? If I'm straight, am I okay with my queerness, my gayness? If I'm white, if I'm whatever, get back to Walt Whitman, I contain multitudes. Are they okay? Do they talk to each other? Can they fall out and make up? Or are they going to pretend that each other don't exist? I'm just this. I'm only this. So the sun never sets. What a wonderful poke. What a wonderful finger. What a wonderful wake-up call. My shame, my guilt. Are they a problem? Well, only if I want to let them be. Then we'll do something about it. Or at the very least, sit here and experience and not turn away.